Now then, if those are the kind of opportunities that emerging technologies represent, then one of the greatest threats is cybercrime. In the digital and data era, with almost 9 in 10 cybercrimes, financially motivated, it's become clear that cybersecurity is a necessity for business resilience, not just a nice to have. So in a world of increasingly prolific cyber threats, how do organizations implement strategies that don't stifle innovation? Well, we're going to discuss that next with our next panel, and to introduce that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Danny Lopez, CEO of the award-winning cybersecurity firm Glasswall, who's also non-executive director at Innovate Finance. So Danny, over to you. Thank you so much.
Shall I get all my panelists to come to?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today on half an hour on cyber security. The session today is called, Is the Growing Threat of Cybercrime Stifling Innovation? And as I was preparing for this session, I decided to ask ChatGPT that very same question, thinking that if the answer was a very clear yes or no, then it probably didn't make much sense to actually have this session. So I asked ChatGPT, and the answer was perhaps, which I felt that gave us enough of a license to be able to spend the next half an hour talking about such an important topic. So I've got 4 people who have joined me today. Thank you all so much for coming along. To my left is Simon Church, chair of Xalient, who are experts in software security technologies. Simon is a bit of a rock star in the cyberspace, having spent time at Maxiv, Optiv, Vodafone, and NTT, amongst others. Welcome, Simon. Thank you. Cate is a partner at PA Consulting, leading at PA on digital trust and transformation, an authority in the space, having spent time not just also at EY, but also in a number of roles as a senior civil servant at the UK government. Welcome, Cate.
Thank you.
Andrew is Detective Chief Superintendent at City of London Police, and also National Cybercrime Program Lead at the National Police Chiefs Council, and very much is close to what's going on in the cyberspace across the country. So Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. And last but not least, Cristina, based in Spain, who has joined us today. She is the co-founder and COO of leading company in the threat modeling platform space, multi-award winner in software and female founders rankings. Cristina, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So let's get to it. Cybercrime is growing, unfortunately. The numbers are pretty staggering. By 2025, it is expected to be an industry worth $10 trillion. And the number of ransomware attacks last year alone was around 500 million. And across the UK, around 40% of companies think or declared that they had some type of cyber incident. And I'm going to ask the audience here, hands up if you suffered a cyber attack over the last 12 months of some sort, which is not quite 40%. And that essentially means that there are a number of people in this room who have suffered a cyber attack. You're just not aware that it's happened. And unfortunately, that is happening more and more. It's just the lack of awareness that you have been exposed to a threat and unfortunately the victim of some kind of attack. But Simon, why don't you kick us off? The reality is that cybercrime has become more sophisticated, more widespread, it's relentless. What are some of the cybersecurity threats that companies up and down the country, particularly in the financial services space, are facing right now in the UK?
I think it's probably good just to step back a bit and talk about your 10 trillion number.
Yeah.
Just to put it into context, this year, that's estimated to be 8 trillion. And again, to put that into context even more, that's, from a GDP point of view, that's the 3rd largest country in the world, or 2 Germanys. And that gives you the scale of what is happening. A lot of cybersecurity attacks emanate from what is now big business. This is managed business. If you look and research these organizations, a lot of these organizations are based around organized crime or have developed into organized crime. It's much more lucrative than the global drugs trade. And what you see is lots of as a service, so ransomware as a service, malware as a service, and of course Andrew can talk a lot more about this. And you look at these organizations, they have help desks, they have sales organizations, they have HR, recruitment organizations, and this really is quite significant, and this is what we're dealing with now. If you then wrap into what's happening in sort of the geopolitical, financial environment today, that exacerbates the problem. And it's not just about ransomware and various different attacks. It's all around, all about social media manipulation as well, which destabilizes nations. I think Danny's asked me along because I get access to lots of stats, and I've got my crib sheet here, so I can give you a few more stats with regards to where that is. So in terms of year-on-year growth, we've seen a 42% increase in cyber attacks last year. And that is the biggest amount of phishing we've ever seen, the biggest amount of distributed denial of services attacks, the highest level of recorded malware. We've seen a 63% increase in ransomware attacks in Europe. 18 of those attacks were critical incidents in the UK, where we had to utilize intelligence services, national crime services, and the cybersecurity industry to manifest and help through those incidents, which were very, very high profile. Data breaches now on average cost £4.35 million. Even with small organizations, Vodafone did a study recently with the very smallest of SMEs, typically just to fix what's broken, and that's not including shutdown of business, that's averaging somewhere between £4,000 and £10,000 to replace technology. I could go on, but I'll probably give a bit the floor more and my colleagues, and you can come back to me later on, Danny, with more stats.
Thank you, Simon. I mean, out of interest, for how many people in this room would cyber risk be a top 5 risk that you are thinking about right now? And are you more worried today than you were this time last year? Okay. You might be even more worried by the end of this session, but hopefully we will have also given you a number of solutions to deal with that worry. So Cate, you live and breathe digital transformation. Companies you deal with are facing with that challenge, and that's actually accelerated quite a lot over the last 24 months. Do you think cyber risk and cyber crime is essentially a blocker to a company's ability or wish to accelerate their digital transformation?
I think actually now it's much more of a catalyst. So had you asked me sort of 3-5 years ago, yes, you could get an element of paralysis when you see something you don't understand happening in your organization. Now actually it's better understood, not completely understood, but actually there's the opportunity to turn that into, okay, so what are we going to do differently? We've seen our organization or an organization that looks very like us hit by a cyber attack. So what do we do about it? We can't not be a digital organization. That's the world we live in. It's not a choice. How do we be the digital AI first organization that is going to be the leader in whatever it is we do in a way that is safe and secure? So that's now the discussion. It's much more, how do we make sure we do things in a safe and secure way so that cybercrime is inevitable. Those 40% that know they've been hit, the other 60% have probably got something in the systems that you just don't know about yet. So let's educate the organization to make a balanced business decision. This isn't a techie thing. This is what are the core processes, what are the core deliverables that the organization has to have in place to do its job. Technology isn't there for technology's sake. Technology is there so that we can do what our organizations are designed to do. And that's the change in the conversation. So cybercrime and cyber attacks now are much more a catalyst for that change and part of how you go and argue for the investment and funding, for the protections and the measures and the education that you need.
So if anything, cyber can be an enabler.
It's absolutely an enabler.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of financial services firms, and many of them I'm sure are in this room, they worry about the risks. So, Cristina, when you think about, in your space particularly, because a lot of what you do is in financial services, what do the firms you deal with worry about the most? What is top of their concern list?
Yeah, since software is everywhere and everything runs in software nowadays, and from applications to programs to platforms, financial services have been used to build walls around the vaults, and that they're very good at. But now application software is the weakest windows they have in their building. And if they are not worried about software security, they should be. And because it's rapidly changing, this software. So when things are rapidly changing, there's so many things that can go wrong. So the software security is one of the main things they have to worry about, or they are worrying about. Then the other one is obviously reputational impact. Any type of breach, even if it's not exposing sensitive data, any type of exposure to weakness to the world will breach the trust that the end customer has with the financial institution. And you don't want that because reputation takes ages to build, and it can fall down instantly within minutes. And then the third one, I think it's any attack, any threat to the availability of the service. Because imagine a banking app that goes down for a day or just minutes. You can't have that. You can't afford that. So availability of the service is very important.
What's interesting, though, as I reflect on your answer and Cate's answer, is that different people should be worrying about different things in the organization to then make sure that conversation you're talking about, Cate, is happening in the right way. Does that make sense?
It does, and some of those things, so what are your core processes? Is it that the banking app is available for customers? Is it that your payroll is going to run on a Friday? Those are the things that your IT and your IT security is there to support. That's what's enabling your organization to deliver, and that's what you need to make sure you can continue to do to grow and to be respected in the marketplace.
And this is, I've heard you say before, Cate, which is probably very relevant in a building like this, but protecting your crown jewels is sort of one of the #1 priorities. I'm assuming that still remains an important part of the strategy. Absolutely,
and that's also about understanding what your crown jewels are. As an organisation, what is it that you cannot live without, that your organisation, there's no point you turning up in the morning to do your job if your organisation can't do that. So what are those essential things that the crown jewels that mean that you can, as a bank, deliver to your customers, as an insurance firm, make sure that you know where your assets are. What are they? Are they protected? And have you got in place the right thing to know that if they're attacked, you can see that attack coming and do something about it quickly?
So Andrew, we're very pleased that you're here today, because it's not often that you get to have the view from the policing side, and a lot of the work that you're doing is either stopping crime or preventing crime. And when it comes to cybercrime, the square mile is clearly going to be one of the areas across the country that has the largest number of attacks, but also with the largest impact in terms of both monetary value and overall widespread value across the network. So what trends can you share with us today of what you've been seeing over the last 12 months?
I suppose, I guess the simplest way of describing it would be the same but different, if that doesn't sound a bit odd. So I think the standard attacks and the vulnerabilities are the same, but we're finding a greater kind of diffusion in the way that they're exploited. I think one of the interesting things we see at the moment is the kind of the profusion of readily available open source AI tools. We're starting to see some of the criminal groups starting to, criminals are often the most, the earliest adopters of different technology sets because they don't have any real restrictions around. They're a lot more flexible in the way they can approach things. They don't have a whole governance framework and process to go through, for starters. But they're kind of really good at kind of utilizing some of those things. So we're seeing some of those AI tools being used to kind of develop better malware quicker, which is slightly concerning. We're also seeing we've got some linked concerns around the profusion and the development of the capability around deepfakes is a bit of a worry. There's definitely an emerging trend there. Although going back to the kind of same but different, deep fakes aren't new. We've been investigating those in one form or another since 2018. So I think we're probably seeing a profusion in, and Simon kind of alluded to it, with the kind of increasing fragmentation of the different cybercrime groups and the whole as-a-service, almost franchise model. It's harder and harder sometimes to know who's behind some of the different malware strains or some of the different activities. And we also saw through the pandemic a big shift in terms of, this will sound a bit odd, but some of the most observant groups in terms of some of the pandemic restrictions were actually the criminals. A lot of them were actually terrified of going out, and a lot of them stayed at home. So they had to find new ways of committing criminality if they couldn't be out in public spaces. So a lot of untechnically capable, unsophisticated individuals downloading tools, using software that they didn't really understand, didn't really know how it all worked, but that didn't matter. Go and use a few tutorials on YouTube or wherever else, and you're up and running as a cyber criminal. And that's bad in terms of overall volumes, but in terms of policing opportunity, that's actually good for us. A, they're UK-based, which gives us a chance of getting hold of them, or better chance of getting hold of them. We do a lot of work abroad with international partners. It's just harder. But also, their tradecraft's not as good because they don't understand it. So we're in a position now with the cybercrime units we've got across the country of making hundreds of arrests a year as opposed to probably a handful just a few years ago. So I think that the main vulnerabilities we see are still the same. So I think that my mantra would always be just think about doing the world-class basics. Just keep focusing on the basics, doing them to a high standard relentlessly. It's the boring stuff. It's patching. It's multi-factor authentication. We see 50% of successful attacks are as a result of unpatched software. So if you can get that right, you're halfway there. Another 40% is people using existing credentials that have been stolen. So why go to the hassle of learning how to hack effectively if you can just walk through the front door with existing credentials? So the number of organisations say that we don't use MFA because it slows down the experience. Well, you may as well maybe expect not to be in business this time next year. So that's 90% of the problem before you've done anything remotely clever or sophisticated.
It's worrying in many ways, but at the same time, action can be taken. Yeah, and I mean, I alone, I had 4 emails in my inbox today that were phishing emails, and I'm sure everybody faces the same sort of frequency. Out of interest, how many SMEs do we have in the room? Okay, well, this one's for you, because I feel that a lot of these conversations many times end up being focused on a great amount of resources to be able to deal with the risk and the solutions, funding that a lot of the large organizations have, but the smaller players don't necessarily have. So from an SME perspective, Simon, how well equipped do you think they are right now to deal with a lot of the threats that we've discussed? And we'll come later to getting some of those basics right, but where should they be spending their resources on?
So again, a few stats. Just you wouldn't expect me not to start a conversation without a few stats. Luckily for me, luckily for you, I spoke to some of my old colleagues at Vodafone and asked them about SME, because 56% of Vodafone's enterprise business is SMEs, and they polled 500, just over 500 organizations in 2020, and then recently in 2023. And they are organizations of 250 people or less. They found that 54% of those organizations had experienced some form of cyber attack. That's up from 39. So that probably reflects the audience here. 33% of those have seen a number of attacks increase over that period of time. 18% were not protected. And interestingly, 28%, my colleagues will talk about this a bit more, I'm sure, were not aware of any Cyber Essentials course. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about the government Cyber Essentials scheme, so not preparing themselves appropriately. So in terms of how we make it a little bit harder, and a lot of those attacks tend to be pretty simplistic, as Andrew said, it really depends on how small you are. But I would certainly get some awareness training. I would get some world-class basics in place. I would get deploy some technology A lot of it's out there, you know, high brand names, you know, Sophos, Norton, et cetera, that will give you some degree of capabilities. Certainly in my days at Vodafone, and all the telcos are doing this now, the concept of clean or secure connectivity and clean endpoint, you can acquire that from your provider. It probably costs you £1 per day, per device and per user, and that's going to give you a degree of capability. And I would say also make sure that we talk about boards. A lot of organizations don't have boards, but senior leadership team take this as a critical risk to your business. That your systems go down, that stops you being able to do trade, whether you're a plumber or providing very, very complex financial services. And I would say the key thing really is being prepared and practicing your preparedness.
Yeah. So moving on from that, and it's great because that's going to give us the foundation later of a few takeaways that I hope everybody can build on. But moving on from that, Cate, many times cybersecurity has been referred to as the art of protecting businesses against an attack, but you're essentially arguing that it's less of that and it's more about making sure that it's just an integral part of your digital growth strategy. What words of wisdom would you have for everybody here on how they achieve that and how they're able to do that part better?
So absolutely, yes, part of the business growth strategy. And this is about, we talk about building digital trust so you can grow in the digital world. And there are kind of three parts of that. One is, of course, yes, systems that are secure by design. You also need processes that encourage compliance rather than consent and evade, because we're all human. We will all try and find a way around it if we can. And then people with a cyber-savvy mindset at board level and working level, so that you've got across the organisation, yes, of course, systems that are going to help you and protect you and help you to spot when something is going wrong. But you've got the mindset of pride in the workforce that you're looking after your customers' information in the right way. Because you can change what your people do much faster than you can change what your systems do. So with all those three things in place, systems, processes, and people with the right mindset and attitude, you've got effectively 3 lines of defense, in the same way as you would think about 3 lines of defense in an audit type perspective. You need that kind of mindset as you're looking at cybersecurity as well. So putting those in place and building that trust and confidence across the workforce of what their part in it is, and then, as Simon says, exercising that so that they, your employees, are willing to come forward when they see something that's going wrong, so that your security team is the friendly face, it's the people they want to come and talk to, and that your board understand what they do and what they don't do. Because there will be times when something goes pear-shaped and they want to go out and say something. And yet, yes, you have to get to the Twitter sphere within minutes before something else happened. And we've seen this with banking in the US recently. But actually, what are you going to say? You don't know anything. And you certainly don't want your chief exec saying something. So who's going to say what? When are they going to say it? And how are you going to make sure that message lands? So those are the things to get fixed. And then practice it. As Simon said, you don't want the first time your organisation is doing this to be when something is on the front page of Twitter or the Telegraph.
And I'm going to put you on the spot, Cate, but if you thought about the entire UK landscape right now based on what you've said, what score out of 10 would you give the UK on that level of preparedness?
Depends on which bit you look at, but on average about 4.
Okay. And you're a very generous person, so that's just
yeah,
shows...
big business is probably a 5.
Yeah.
SME and medium organisations are probably a 3.
Wow, okay, so there's a long way to go.
There's work to do.
Building on, you talked about secure by design, which is a really, really topical issue. So Cristina, in financial services, with the sorts of clients that you have, which many of them tend to be medium-sized and pretty large, and many of them are global, how do they build new solutions, which they're having to do to compete all of the time, and you know, the cadence of new solutions is only increasing. How do they build them in a way that's essentially secure by design, which is in many ways the framework of achieving a good digital strategy?
Yes. Well, the large companies, they implement, they plan for security the same way they plan for performance or quality. And that is something that we have to replicate everywhere, plan for security. So when you plan, take an application or a platform or a piece of software as if it was an industrial product. The industrial vertical has very interiorized the fact that security by design. What is it? Well, you don't put the airbags on the steering wheel once the car has been built and you put duct tape around it. You think when it's being written, when it's being designed, when it's being in the architectural time. And so you don't bolt in security at the end. You embed it from the start. Even before there's a line of code written, then it's when you have to think security. Think security first all the time. And that activity is called threat modeling. If you do it manually, if you want to scale it with tools, that's fine, but do something. Don't leave the software go and be created to end up in the security analyst's hands, because there's one security analyst per 100 developers. You don't want them to be the bottleneck. So train the developers from the start and just think security at all times from the beginning.
And I mean, in a way, that security mindset goes back to also what you were saying, Cate, where you have that mindset when you're having the conversation, which is a business conversation and a risk conversation, as opposed to a technology conversation, which is what you're saying in many ways.
Exactly. And nowadays, the CISOs are getting into the boards. It's good, but they need to translate technical risk into business risk. And they sometimes go too deeply into the weeds of technicalities. So the board don't understand very much. What they don't understand, they want to avoid or they want to ignore. Just you have to be a CISO that knows how to translate and get out of the technological pieces and bits and see the impact. It's not, you don't have to protect all the databases that it's in your organization in the same way. You have to protect the one that has sensitive data. If you have a database that contains the colors of the rainbow, you don't have to protect it so much. So don't tell me you have to protect all the databases. Select your assets, see your threats, see the probabilities that they have to occur, and how high the impact can be. So this is the type of conversation we have to have at the boards.
And that's how you make it cost effective. That's how you make it cost effective. You look at the things, the crown jewels that you really need to protect. You put in the right protections for those, and that doesn't mean everything has Fort Knox protection. That means the right level for each thing. And you do that from the beginning to your secure by design point, so that you're not retrofitting or trading out some of those security elements. It's more effective and cheaper to design it in and keep it in.
Yeah, and the organizations that get that right have got a far greater chance of A, being secure, and B, enhance innovation, digital transformation. Andrew, when it comes to the work that the City of London Police is focused on, I'm assuming that part of it is about stopping, and another part would be preventing. Out of interest, do you do more of one than the other? And what have you seen over the last year? And any lessons that you can share, particularly from medium-sized companies, as to
Sure. So
what happens when they call you, basically? Because it's very interesting, because I mean, I know a lot of the work that you do, and it's extraordinary, but a lot of people don't necessarily know that there's so much help on offer.
Yeah, we're not very good at communicating what we do on many different levels. So obviously there's a real focus for investigations for us, because if we don't investigate stuff, then frankly policing loses all credibility and no one listens to us when we've got anything else to talk about in terms of prevention. But ideally, from us, from a traditional kind of philosophical policing point of view, we want to prevent crime in the first place, not have people victimised and then investigate after the fact. So a real area for focus for us is around protecting SMEs, because we know the SMEs themselves are, they haven't got the resources or the expertise in-house to do a lot of this stuff. A lot probably over-rely, if I'm honest, on assuming or taking the reassurances of their managed service providers almost at face value. Yeah, we've got great security, it's cutting edge, it's leading. Most of the time, dare I say, it's rubbish. A lot of providers are not meeting an acceptable minimum standard, I would argue, and leaving their clients vulnerable. We see this time and time again. If everybody was doing world-class basics, there would be very little cybercrime, and that's clearly not the case. So what we are focused on in terms of SMEs is two areas. We want to focus on free products and services that SMEs can use and understand. So we want to help people firstly understand the threat they face and the vulnerabilities that they hold. So a big area of focus for that is our promotion of the police cyber alarm. So that's a bit of software that you can download as an SME. It's free, it's Home Office funded, and it will basically sit on your external network and it will look for suspicious activity. It will identify that suspicious activity. It doesn't protect the organisation, but we want to effectively crowdsource that UK-based threat picture in real time so we can better target our resource to have most impact, and we want to be able to have like almost a town and city view of what's happening, because then we can amend our messaging to be more up to date in terms of the latest threats. But those organisations that benefit from police cyber alarm will get automated monthly vulnerability scans and assessments. So you'll get a report from us in English, not technical jargon, that says these are the vulnerabilities you hold. These are the various these are the doors and windows that you're leaving open that you need to fix pretty quickly. And what we've done over the last couple of years is all the big the big kind of vulnerabilities that the big companies announce, then all the criminals pile in before they all get fixed. We probably see on average organisations taking a couple of years to patch some of those vulnerabilities. The companies and organisations that we're telling have got those vulnerabilities, because we scan for those, and we regularly have police officers literally knocking on the door of these organisations to say, this is a high-risk vulnerability, you need to fix it now. They're generally fixing those between that time and the next time we do a vulnerability scan in another month. So it's really, really impactful. We've got about 7,000 members and growing all the time. We also get a threat report from us that says these are the kind of attacks that you're seeing, this is where they're coming from. And what we find from all the, analysing all the hundreds of millions of different suspicious activities or attacks that we monitor, we're seeing an awful lot of, probably the vast majority of those attacks are coming from IP that's been compromised in other organisations. So you've got victims being used to attack other victims from all over the world. So it goes to your point earlier, Danny, about that huge number of organisations that don't realise that they've been compromised. So that's what we do to help you understand the threat and your vulnerabilities. On the other side is it's kind of all very well saying, like, this is your problem, you need to fix it. But if you're an organisation that doesn't know how to fix it, where do you go? We've got an amazing cybersecurity industry in this country, but how do you pick one company over another, and how do you even understand, frankly, half the time what they're even talking about? So you need a trusted marketplace almost, or a trusted place to go to start yourself out on that resilience journey. So we've created a network of cyber resilience centres across the country. London's launched last October, working with some of the top student talent in the country. So we're in partnership with 32 universities currently across the UK. We work with their students to deliver not consultancy, because they're absolutely not consultants, but they will do staff awareness training. They will come into an SME and help test it and help it understand its vulnerabilities and what it needs to improve. So you can then have informed conversations with your IT providers about meeting that basic level of security, and then being a more intelligent consumer of cybersecurity industry services, so then you can go out into that broader ecosystem with the confidence that you're looking for the right tools and advice, obviously at a much higher level from the student. So it's win-win for everybody. So those are the two areas of focus for us.
So let's, as we come to the end, thank you for that, Andrew. As we come to the end then, why don't we try and identify 4 takeaways on that whole point of cyber hygiene and getting the basics right, which I think it really is been validated in this session that attackers will always try and find the weakest link. They will tend to go for the easy route into organizations, so actually protecting those potential threats are typically a good way to start. But if I asked each of you to think about one thing that organizations, regardless of whether they're in the public or private sector, need to think about as they enhance their cyber hygiene, what would it be? And I'll start with you, Simon.
Well, I'll take the cheap one. I'll say have a plan. Clearly, no matter.
You can see everybody else going.
Yeah. Definitely have a plan. I mean, I'll give you a prime example that I shared with my fellow panelists in the green room. I was in a very senior job in a very large organisation a few years ago, and we were going through our disaster planning exercise, and we got to pandemic, and we all chuckled to each other and said, that won't happen, we continued. Obviously, hindsight is a very, very clear science. And If you haven't been affected by a cybersecurity event, you will be. So have a plan. And the key thing here is it's not technology, it's people. It's how you react, how your people react, and your people will be your first point of protection. I'll give you another very, very quick analogy or example. I had a situation, another organization I was in where I was a very senior member of staff, and I allegedly sent an email to our Treasury Department asking for 100,000 euros to be transferred to this particular account. Luckily, the person in the Treasury Department said, this is way too polite for Simon. It clearly hasn't come from him, and questioned it with the CFO, and it came to light. So have a plan, make sure you are expecting these things to happen, and practice. Sorry.
Super, thanks. We've got a couple of minutes left, so Cate?
Demystify cyber.
Yeah.
It's not a techie thing. It's a business thing. Translate it into business language, business impacts, and make sure that everybody knows how it's going to help the growth of the organization. We live in a digital world. We have no choice. Get on with it and get cyber as part of your growth strategy.
And I love that point. Also, it links to what Cristina was saying earlier. A lot of board members don't want to talk about cyber because they don't necessarily feel they understand it and they don't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah.
So demystify. Excellent. Thank you. Andrew?
I would say world-class basics, and when you focus on your world-class basics, look particularly at patching and multi-factor authentication. If you're an SME, sign up to the Police Cyber Alarm and your local Cyber Resilience Centre, because they'll help you on your kind of maturity and understanding journey. And if you're a big company and you've got a SME supply chain, which everybody does, get them to sign up to both of those, because that's the biggest vulnerability of the supply chain.
Great. Thank you. And Cristina?
I will say everybody get certified in the ISO 27001. Those are the basics right there. But the one measure that I implemented in the company that has given the most return of investment in security-wise is training security awareness to your employees, because that's, as you were saying, Danny, that they are the weakest link is where they come through. And that is always human error and human ignorance sometimes, so train them.
Thank you. So it's basically HDWT, which I'm not sure anybody's going to remember, but what it stands for is have a plan, demystify cyber, world-class basics, and training and awareness. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to all of you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming as one of the last sessions of the day on such an important topic. Thank you. And of course, thank you to my panelists. You've been wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.